It's 5 p.m. here in Lagos, Nigeria. Welcome to the World Today. I'm Joke Rogers. Here's what's coming up on the program. U.S. President Donald Trump signs order to impose sanctions on the International Criminal Court as the ICC vows to continue its judicial work. 10 people feared dead as U.S. authorities search for a small plane reported missing in Alaska. Plus, Israel's defense minister tells army to plan for Palestinians leaving Gaza in line with the U.S. proposal to take over territory. U.S. President Donald Trump has signed an executive order sanctioning the International Criminal Court for what he terms illegitimate and baseless actions targeting America and Israel. The order comes with implications of financial and visa restrictions on individuals and their families who assist in ICC investigations of American citizens or allies. It may be due in part to an arrest warrant that the ICC issued on Israeli leader Benjamin Netanyahu over alleged war crimes in Gaza last November. In recent years, the court also issued arrest warrants for Russian President Vladimir Putin over alleged war crimes in Ukraine, Taliban leaders for persecuting Afghan females, and Myanmar's military leader for crimes against the Rohingya Muslims. More than 120 countries are members of the court, including the UK and many European nations, but the US and Israel are not. In response to this, the International Criminal Court vows to continue its judicial work, reiterating that it stands firmly by its personnel and that the order seeks to harm its independent and impartial work. We'll get more on that in a moment. America's foreign aid agency, USAID, could see its staff slashed from about 10,000 to fewer than 300 globally as the Trump administration makes major cuts to government spending. All but a handful of essential staff are already set to be placed on administrative leave as at midnight on Friday, including thousands based abroad. An online notice says a plan is being prepared for return travel and the termination of non-essential contractors. The union representing employees, which is involved in a legal challenge to the plan, says just 295 staff have been deemed essential. Mr. Trump's cutbacks to USAID, championed by his cost-cutting advisor Elon Musk, have upended the global aid system with hundreds of programs already frozen in countries around the world. His team accuses USAID of wasting taxpayer money and failing to align with America First policy priorities. U.S. authorities are looking for a small plane carrying 10 people reported missing in Alaska. The U.S. Coast Guard for the Alaska region said a Cessna Caravan aircraft was 12 miles offshore on a flight from Unalakleet to Nome when its position was lost. The two cities are some 146 miles from each other across the Norton Sound, an inlet of the Bering Sea on Alaska's western coast. State officials said in a statement that search and rescue crews are working to get to the last known coordinates of the flight. Alaska's Department of Public Safety says the 10 people on board comprised 9 passengers and a pilot. We can now return to our top story on the U.S. President Donald Trump sanctioning the International Criminal Court for its work, issuing arrest warrants on some of its allies. Joining us now is Charles Adiogun Phillips, former ICC prosecutor himself. Thank you, Charles, for joining us today.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
President Trump's reason for sanctioning the ICC is an accusation that the court is targeting America and its close ally, Israel. Is this true?
The Economic Powers Act. And that law was enacted in 1997 to enable the President of the United States declare national emergencies with limited or no congressional oversight. Now, The executive order itself authorizes the U.S. Secretary of State to designate what is often referred to as designated persons in consultation with the U.S. Treasury Secretary and the U.S. Attorney General. So, in essence, ICC officials and all their families will be placed on what is called a specially designated nationals list of blocked persons, and that list is maintained by the Office of Foreign Assets Control within the Department of the Treasury. Now, this is not the first time that this has happened to officials of the ICC. As you may well recall, in September 2020, the United States government imposed sanctions on the International Criminal Court prosecutor, my friend Fatou Bensouda, and one other person. But this is the first time that sanctions are being imposed on the ICC as an institution. So practically, what do these sanctions entail? Well, first, any property held in the United States by any named ICC official, either outrightly or by virtue of their majority share therein, 50% or more, becomes blocked. Now, recall I used the word blocked and not seized, because even though such properties have not been seized, such officials or their families would not be able to exercise any rights over such property, either selling it or using it. In addition, U.S. persons or U.S. entities located anywhere else in the world would not be able to transact business or provide services to the ICC or any named ICC official unless, and of course, they have received a license to do so from the US government. In addition, all property that might belong to the ICC or any named ICC official that comes within the US jurisdiction remains blocked. Why is this significant? Well, this is significant because the vast majority of international trade is conducted using the United States dollar. And this can have potentially very broad implications. For example, US dollar denominated transactions, even though they were between non-US parties, would usually require a US correspondent bank to handle such transactions. Therefore, if that transaction passes through any US correspondent bank, they may be blocked, momentarily or otherwise. That transaction becomes blocked. Now, the importance of the US dollar transactions and the fear of losing access to risk-adverse US banks means that most financial institutions around the globe will refuse to conduct business with the ICC as an institution or with ICC officials on the SDN list. So even though these transactions have no relations to US dollar or US persons or US jurisdiction, they might be blocked because of the US correspondent banking relationship. So this really broadens the reach of the sanctions far beyond blocking assets like bank accounts or physical property located in the US, because basically any transaction going through a US bank, correspondence or otherwise, would be blocked. Now, do these sanctions comply with international law? That is the other part of your question. And let me deal with that as quickly as I can. The use of sanctions by states, particularly outside the framework of the United Nations Security Council, has a very complicated relationship in international law. Why is that? Well, depending on the measures adopted by a state, sanctions could be an entirely legal exercise of sovereignty or potentially an unlawful breach of international law that may require some justification. So whether unilateral sanctions need to be justified at all is also the subject of widespread debate amongst the international community. So there is no legal framework internationally that applies to states adopting sanctions in international law. And this is a very complex area. And there's so many factors that may make it difficult for particular measures to be compatible or incompatible with international laws. There is no single treaty that deals with states imposing sanctions either in exercise of their sovereign functions or in exercise of their obligations under international conventions. One thing that comes to mind is the principle of non-intervention in international law, where states have the right to conduct their domestic affairs outside of devoid of outside interference. There's also the principle of sovereign equality of states, which says that states can regulate their own affairs free from the jurisdiction of foreign courts. So these are some of the international principles that would come into play in deciding whether or not the sanctions imposed by the United States are justified or not. Let me stop there.
Right, and so the Netherlands, which hosts the court, has come out to say it regrets Mr. Trump's order as the court's work is essential in the fight against impunity. Could this sanctioning have any impact on the court's ability to investigate and prosecute international crimes, and particularly the implications for global accountability?
You see, unlike the sanctions that were imposed on the former ICC prosecutor in September 2020, pardon me, this time around, it is the ICC itself that has been sanctioned. And the executive order and the sanctions could have very serious and wide-reaching consequences for the work of the court. I'll give you an example. Current service providers to the ICC may actually stop supporting the court because they would want to run foul of US government sanctions. Financial institutions may actually go out of their way to comply with these US regulations and may preemptively refuse to deal with transactions involving the ICC. Now, in addition, the executive order is aimed at, it will create some apprehension and uncertainty for NGOs, consultants, lawyers, and even staff that work with the ICC. What happens to staff just transacting business and sending their money to their relatives' home? So these are very wide-ranging issues that may actually impede the functioning of the court on a daily basis, in my view.
Right, and for allies of the United States, will the U.S. sanctions against the ICC affect relations with other countries, particularly European allies who support the ICC?
This is a very good question, and I'll tell you why. The reason why I refer to it as a good question is that the European Union has enacted something called the blocking statute. And the blocking statute was to counter the extraterritorial reach of unilateral sanctions imposed by other countries where the European community considers such sanctions to be unlawful. Now, the blocking statute broadly restricts EU-based individuals and entities from complying with sanctions that the EU considers abusive in their extraterritorial reach. And this is very important for the functioning of the ICC, because at a political level, it also reflects the EU's disapproval of sanctions with an extraterritorial reach imposed by other countries, in this case the United States, where the EU considers such sanctions to be abusive or unreasonable. So the EU blocking statute has not only prohibited individuals and entities in the EU from complying with US sanctions in the case of Iran, Cuba, and Libya. So it will be interesting to see how the EU as a regional bloc reacts using the blocking statute to this sanction on the ICC.
And the US is already having some sort of problems with, some global bodies pulling out of the WHO. And, we also see issues with the United Nations. Can the UN Security Council play a role in resolving the tensions between the US and the ICC? What are the potential limitations of such an involvement?
Well, the US government, in fairness, has never previously deployed sanctions against officials at an international organization or an international court, or indeed the organization itself, as we're seeing now. So here, the US has decided to utilize the coercive powers of sanctions against the ICC, which in itself is a court of last resort, mandated to fight impunity for serious violations of international law. A treaty-based court, which many US allied countries are members of. So frankly, I don't see any rule for UN Security Council intervention because in resolving the tensions between the US and the ICC. Why? Well, because the US is a permanent member of the Security Council, and it can therefore utilize or exercise its veto powers to block resolutions it considers adverse to its national interest. It's quite as simple as that.
Right. Former ICC prosecutor Charles Adiogun Phillips speaking to us from The Hague in the Netherlands. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Israel's defense minister has told its military to prepare a plan to allow any resident of Gaza who wishes to leave to do so, in line with President Donald Trump's proposal for the U.S. to take over the territory and resettle its 2.1 million Palestinians elsewhere. Israel Katz said Gazans should have freedom of movement and migration, and countries critical of Israel's war with Hamas are obligated to take them in. Israel controls the movement of people into and out of Gaza. Meanwhile, President Trump says Gaza would be turned over to the U.S. by Israel at the conclusion of fighting. But the Palestinian presidency reiterated its rejection of the plan, which it had said would violate international law, and insisted that Palestine is not for sale. In the meantime, Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar says Gaza is a failed experiment, urging for new ideas for a post-war Gaza. He made the comments during a joint statement alongside Italian Deputy Prime Minister Antonio Tajani. Mr. Sa'ar was reacting to U.S. President Trump saying Israel would hand over Gaza to the United States after fighting was over and the enclave's population was resettled elsewhere. On his part, Antonio Tajani, Italian Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, says Italy believes in a region with two people, two states.
Hamas leaders have repeatedly declared their intent to carry out more October 7-style attacks against Israel. They are committed to their idea of eliminating the Jewish state. Israel will not accept Hamas rule in Gaza. As long as Hamas is in power, there will be no peace, no security, and no stability in this region. UNRWA is not part of the solution in Gaza. UNRWA is part of the problem. UNRWA employees participated in the October 7 massacre. UNRWA facilities are used for Hamas terror operations. UNRWA leadership did nothing to uproot the terror activities in its organizations. Today, I believe it is important to listen carefully to new ideas that have been proposed and to think outside the box. Gaza is a failed experiment. It failed under Egyptian sovereignty. It failed when handed to the Palestinian Authority under the Oslo Accords. Ever since we saw terrorism in a rise. It has certainly failed under Hamas regime. Gaza in its current state has no future. We must try to find a different solution. We must take a new approach. We have an opportunity today to try to build a better future for ourselves and for the entire Middle East. War for itself is not an ideology. If we can achieve our objectives, by diplomatic means, by political means, very good. If we will not be able to do that, we will have to go back to military activities. We would like to implement, but we have a commitment. We will not. I said it previously. Hamas rule in Gaza will make, first of all, it will make the life of Palestinian residents in Gaza miserable, as it did. It will be a consistent threat for the security of our people, and it will be a source of instability to all the region. We don't want to go back to suggestions and moves and plans that were failed already in the past. We must think differently.
Meanwhile, the World Health Organization senior official Rick Peppercorn says the health needs in the Gaza Strip are immense as functional health facilities and services are scarce. Mr. Peppercorn was speaking to reporters from Gaza via video link. The WHO senior official notes that everyone in Gaza is affected by the conflict with stress, anxiety, depression and feelings of loneliness. He said only 2 psychiatrists and a few mental health professionals are in the north.
First and foremost, of course, the health needs, focusing on health, they're immense. The functional health facilities and services are scarce. We still talk about 18 of the 36 hospitals, partly functional, and roughly 1/3, 55 of the 143 primary healthcare centers, partly functional, 11 field hospitals operational. Total bed capacity is 1,900. Used to be, before the crisis, more than 3,500. And to say something about mental health, maybe start something different, is that everyone in Gaza is affected by this 15, 16 months conflict. I mean, and literally everyone, including my staff, the stress, anxiety, kind of feeling of loneliness, depression, etc., all over. If you look at the number of psychiatrists, only 2 in the north, and a few mental health professionals. And also we started training programs. Of late, 44 mental health humanitarian health workers were trained on psychological first aid to provide this immediate emotional and psychological support. Early and also ensure early detection and enable safe referrals. It's impressive, by the way, and something positive if you go to Shifa Hospital, and we all know that all these hospitals, they became non-functional, nothing happened, that they bounced back. It's in the middle of the severe destruction. Some departments are working, and it's working again as a referral hospital. So we support an emergency medical team, a national emergency medical team. There's general surgery going on, trauma surgery going on, and mother and child health, obs and gynae, etc. So a lot is going on. And also some substantial renovations to expand the inpatients departments and the ICU.
Meanwhile, the UN's Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Tom Fletcher, has accompanied an aid convoy into the Gaza Strip, where the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs and partners continue to respond to immense needs as part of a prepared scale-up of its operations. Since the ceasefire, displaced families have been returning to their neighborhoods and towns, many times to find piles of rubble where their homes once stood. In northern Gaza, Mr. Fletcher spoke with survivors and returnees in Jabalia, trying to rebuild their lives amid the rubble.
So we're here in northern Gaza, and we've driven through the desolation of rubble, pulverized homes, pulverized communities, pulverized lives. Over 50,000 dead, over 100,000 injured. And the most important thing we can do today is to bear witness to the level of destruction. And when you see people picking through the rubble of their homes and their lives, desperate to rebuild, it's a wake-up call for the world that we have to deliver life-saving aid to these communities. We've got the first 10,000 trucks through in just 2 weeks, but we've got to do much, much more. And we've got to be here. We've got to see this, and we've got to tell the story to the world.
Meanwhile, in Somalia, hundreds of residents gathered in the Peace Garden in Mogadishu to show their support for Palestine. Many participants waved Palestinian flags and displayed banners stating Gaza is not for sale and Somalis stand with Palestine. They criticized President Trump's suggestion that residents of Gaza should relocate to Egypt and Jordan, calling it a trap and suggestion that undermines justice. Here in Africa, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has issued a special appeal for peace in the Democratic Republic of Congo, warning that the humanitarian situation in Goma is dire as thousands have been killed and hundreds of thousands displaced due to ongoing violence. Speaking ahead of a key summit of the East African Community, the Southern African Development Community and the African Union Peace and Security Council, Mr. Guterres called for an immediate halt to hostilities. The UN chief will travel to Addis Ababa next week and will take part in the African Union Peace and Security Council Summit, where discussions on restoring stability in the Great Lake region are expected to take center stage.
We are at a pivotal moment, and it's time to rally together for peace. Tomorrow, leaders from the East African Community and the Southern African Development Community will take part in a summit in Tanzania. And the focus will be addressing the crisis in the face of the offensive by the M23, supported by the Rwandan Defense Forces. Next week, in Addis Ababa, I will take part in a summit-level meeting of the African Union Peace and Security Council, where this crisis will be also front and center. In advance of these crucial gatherings, I want to make a special appeal for peace. Thousands of people have been killed, including women and children, and hundreds of thousands have been forced from their homes in the eastern DRC. We also see the continuous threats by other armed groups, either Congolese or foreign. All of this is having an enormous human toll. We have countless reports of human rights abuses, including sexual and gender-based violence, forced recruitment, and the disruption of life-saving aid. The humanitarian situation in and around Goma is perilous. Hundreds of thousands of people are on the move, with many of the previous sites hosting displaced people north of the city now looted, destroyed, or abandoned. Healthcare facilities are overwhelmed, and other basic services, including schools, water, electricity, phone lines, and internet, are severely limited. Meanwhile, the conflict continues to rage in South Kivu and risks engulfing the entire region. I want to pay tribute to all those who have lost their lives, including MONUSCO Blue Helmets and regional forces. And I express my solidarity with the Congolese people who find themselves yet again the victims of seemingly endless cycle of violence. As the summit in Tanzania gets underway, and as I prepare to leave for Addis Ababa, my message is clear. Silence the guns. Stop the escalation. Respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Uphold international human rights law and international humanitarian law. There is no military solution. It's time for all the signatories of the Peace, Security and Cooperation Framework for the DRC and the region to honor their commitments. It's time for mediation. It's time to end this crisis. It's time to peace. The stakes are too high, and we need the active and constructive role of all players, namely neighboring countries, sub-regional organizations, the African Union, and the United Nations. Let us all act together for peace.
Elsewhere, South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has issued a strong response to U.S. President Donald Trump, insisting that his country will not be bullied and will defend its national interests and sovereignty. This comes on the heels of President Ramaphosa's signing of the expropriation bill, which has sparked international debate. The American president had threatened to halt all U.S. funding, calling the law a massive human rights violation. Mr. Ramaphosa directly addressed Mr. Trump's recent claims that certain groups in South Africa are being mistreated with the bill.
Seeing the rise of nationalism, protectionism, the pursuit of narrow interests, and the decline of common cause. This is the world that we, as South Africa, a developing economy, must now navigate. But we are not daunted to navigate our path through this world that constantly changes. We will not be deterred. We are, as South Africans, a resilient people, and we will not be bullied. We will stand together as a united nation, and we will speak with one voice in defense of our national interests, our sovereignty, and our constitutional democracy. By standing true to our values, by harnessing our unique strengths and endowments, and by forging a common purpose, we can turn these trying circumstances to our advantage and propel our country forward.
A fourth group of Kenyan police have arrived in Haiti to help combat violent gangs at Port-au-Prince. In the meantime, UNICEF Global spokesperson James Elder has traveled to Port-au-Prince, Haiti, where violence from armed groups is overwhelming communities, especially children. Violence has reached unprecedented levels, gravely impacting children's rights to safety, health, and education. In 2024, armed violence led to over 5,600 deaths, impacting 2.7 million people, including 1.6 million women and children. Almost 1 in 8, or over 500,000 children in Haiti, have been displaced by violence by armed groups. The recruitment of children by armed groups and sexual violence against children are also rising at an alarming rate.
These kids here, they're the lucky ones, but it cannot be about luck going to school, because this education, as we've heard, education is going to be the sustenance of Haiti. So support and stability gets all the kids here in Port-au-Prince, all the kids in Haiti, back into a classroom.
European regulators are cracking down on ultra-fast fashion companies like Shein and Temu, despite the clothing brand's popularity on social media and among young people. New customs controls could mark them as, quote, dangerous goods. Earlier this week, the European Commission said Chinese online marketplace Temu and fast fashion retailer Shein will be liable for the sale of unsafe and dangerous products on their platforms as part of a crackdown against a flood of cheap e-commerce imports into the European Union. The EU executive also said it will coordinate a joint investigation by the Consumer Protection Corporation network of national consumer authorities into Shein based on suspicions that the company infringes EU consumer protection rules. The measures by the EU executive echo a similar push by the US government, which ended a trade provision this week used by retailers, including Temu and Shein, to ship low-value packages duty-free to the United States. For more, we're joined by Deutsche Welle's Cassandra Sundit in Berlin. Hello, Cassandra. What did Brussels decide?
Well, these rules will affect so-called low-value parcels. So the rules here are about phasing out exemptions for parcels valued at under 150 euros, and that would make Temu and Shein and the like liable for the sale of unsafe and dangerous products on their platforms. And there's also talk about a coordinated joint investigation by the Consumer Protection Cooperation Network into Shein to see whether the company infringes on EU consumer protection rules. There was praise for this move from Germany, where the German Retail Association said an EU-wide strategy to help make online trade more fair is well overdue.
And how big is this problem in Europe?
In particular, there has been a flood of these kinds of items coming into the European Union. Approximately 12 million of these packages are coming into the EU every day, with parcels from China making up more than 90% of them. It's also important to note here that there's been a dramatic increase of these parcels in recent years. So these regulations are not just rules for rules' sake. The Commission says there are unsafe and dangerous goods that are coming into the European Union and directly into the mailboxes of European residents. And of course, your audience might wonder what kind of safety issues we're talking about here when it comes to fast fashion. But these retailers are also selling goods here that include electric heaters that shock people or risk causing fires, cosmetics and sunscreens that are improperly labeled, and crash helmets that are, quote, inadequate.
It's not just Europe, Cassandra. There are other regulators cracking down on these ultra-cheap goods.
Right. Well, yes and no to some of those crackdowns. So the United States is a big player here, the world's biggest economy. And there is, of course, U.S. President Trump's favorite word, tariffs, and those would affect goods coming from China across the board. And the Trump administration also closed a small goods custom loophole. That threshold was up to $800 and allowed these small packages to forego duties or inspections when shipped to individuals. Nigeria is seeing an increase in these kinds of app-based stores, but they're fairly new still. For example, after entry into South Africa early in 2024, Temu is now operating in Nigeria. And just weeks after it launched there, it became the most downloaded app in both the Android and Apple app stores in Nigeria. As for Shein, it's immensely popular with shoppers in the UAE, South Africa, and Morocco. So we'll see what regulations might come down the pipe there. But in India, I think this is an interesting outlier or counterexample. India actually allowed the relaunch of Shein there after a 5-year ban. So actions by governments are varied so far, even as consumers seem to gobble up these cheap and fashionable items.
Cassandra, thank you for your time. With the economic waves from the war in Gaza spilling over in the Middle East, the IMF says it's working with the Egyptian authorities to shore up its economy and foster reforms. Speaking for the fund, IMF spokesperson Julie Kozak said a new planned loan agreement will take the form of a Resilience and Sustainability Facility, or RSF. Although she could not confirm the size of the loan, she emphasized that it will have economic reforms at its core and will be designed in part to help countries tackling climate change.
And secondly,
in light of the difficult external conditions and challenging domestic environment, the IMF staff and the Egyptian authorities agreed to recalibrate the fiscal consolidation path, and this was agreed in December, I would highlight, to create fiscal space for critical social programs benefiting vulnerable groups and the middle class, while ensuring debt sustainability. Looking forward, reform priorities comprise lowering inflation, sustaining exchange rate flexibility, and liberalized access to foreign exchange. In addition, the program aims to boost domestic revenues. It aims to improve the business environment. It aims to accelerate disinvestment, or divestment rather, and leveling the playing field between state-owned enterprises and the private sector. And of course, it also aims to enhance governance and transparency. An IMF team will visit Maputo in the coming weeks to engage with the new government. We do remain engaged to support the country's efforts toward remaining macroeconomic stability, accelerating growth, and making growth more inclusive in line with the arrangements. But given that there's a mission in the coming weeks, we'll have more to report.
Escalating violence in South Kordofan and Blue Nile states in Sudan is claiming more civilian lives. Deputy spokesperson for the Secretary General United Nations, Farhan Haq, was given a report from his colleague, the UN resident and humanitarian coordinator in Sudan, Clementine Nkweta Salami. She reported that a recent shelling in the area, which had killed many people and injured dozens more. In the past 10 years, more than 17,000 Nigerians have been living in Chad as refugees. They were forced to leave their homes and entire lives behind in Nigeria by the Boko Haram insurgents, and since 2014 they have sought refuge in the remote area of Chad. Channels Television's Mo Sani Aliyu is currently in Dar es Salaam refugee camp near Bagasula in northwestern Chad and has this report.
This is the Dar es Salaam refugee camp on the northernmost fringes of the massive Lake Chad basin, deep inside the Republic of Chad. Inside this sprawling camp, thousands of Nigerians, young and old, women and children, have spent between 10 to 12 years seeking refuge from the Boko Haram insurgents who forced them out of their homes. They arrived here with only the clothes on their backs after walking for several days through the marshy Lake Chad region. However, thousands of their family members and friends did not make it. The area is remote, without the bare necessities, no electricity, running water, internet access, and tarred roads. It's just a lonely sandy road in and out of the area, hundreds of kilometers from anywhere. The area around Bagasula itself is hot, with a landscape that is dazzlingly bright. It's a toasty 39 degrees Celsius during the day, and at night, temperatures plummet to about 18 degrees Celsius.
Life has been difficult since we got here. There were more than 18,000 Nigerians in this camp at some point in time. Some have left for other places in Chad to escape the harsh life in the camp. From last year, we received food assistance only once.
It appears this time that the promise is being kept because about 20 odd trucks have arrived here already. These refugees will, however, have to travel over a very unforgiving terrain from northwestern Chad to Maiduguri, the Borno state capital. And one can only imagine the level of stress this will add to the mothers and their babies. The trip itself is a logistical headache. The refugees and their goods will have to disembark and switch vehicles twice. What happens after they arrive in Nigeria and the fate of the rest of the refugees still waiting their turn to be taken home from Dar es Salaam refugee camp remains to be seen. From Dar es Salaam refugee camp in Chad, Mo Sani Aliyu reporting for Channels Television News.
The Nigerian Red Cross Society has raised an alarm over the country's staggering road accident rates, revealing that they account for nearly 200,000 of the 2 million annual road traffic deaths worldwide. This is according to the president of the Nigerian Red Cross Society, Mr. Oluyemisi Adiaga, who was speaking at the launch of the Safe Steps Road Safety Campaign in Victoria Island, Lagos. Mr. Adiaga says there's need to urgently address issues of road safety crisis in order to curb the growing menace.
The need to curb road accidents in Lagos has necessitated the launch of Safe Steps Road Safety Campaign, organized by the Nigeria Red Cross Society in collaboration with other private bodies. This is aimed at training commercial bus drivers in Lagos and Abuja on responsible driving practices.
We should tell ourselves the truth because we need to be safe. I want to live 100 years if God permits. But if I expose myself unnecessarily and I don't take caution, I don't take precaution, then I have endangered myself. So that's the reason why we should all collaborate. To me, our collaborative efforts to maximize impact is necessary and compelling.
The representative from the State Ministry of Transportation provides safety tips for enforcement agencies and also asks motorists to obey driving rules.
It is our collective responsibility to create safer roads for all. The Safe Steps campaign focuses specifically on the unique challenges faced by danfo and cab drivers in Lagos and the Federal Capital Territory. These drivers are at the forefront of urban transportation. And it is crucial that we equip them with the necessary skills and knowledge to navigate our roads safely. We aim to tackle issues such as reckless driving, poor vehicle maintenance, limited awareness of traffic laws, and inadequate first aid knowledge. To support our commitment to improving road safety, we have put several safety initiatives in place through the ministries, departments, and agencies. One of the initiatives is the institution of LASRI, Lagos State Drivers Institute. This institute plays an essential role in fostering responsible driving behavior through comprehensive driver education programs. We are committed to ensuring all drivers possess the appropriate skills and knowledge necessary to operate vehicles safely.
Key stakeholders, including the National Association of Road Transport Workers, the Federal Road Safety Corps, Lagos State Traffic Management Authority, Vehicle Inspection Service, urge motorists not to drive under the influence of alcohol in order to prevent accidents.
When you are driving, you don't drink. My message to them is, please, when you are on the steering, do not drink. Before you go on that steering, you see that driver's license you look at, it's key, it's very, very important. Someone who does not have a valid driver's license is not expected to be on the steering. So ensure that your vehicles are roadworthy, ensure that you have all the relevant documents before you go on the road.
The Safe Step Road Safety Campaign will provide targeted educational programs focusing on defensive driving techniques and safe road practices for 15,000 commercial drivers, motorcycle riders, and logistics operators.
Finally, on the program, the Chinese city of Chongqing is home to the world's largest hot pot restaurant, occupying half a hillside as it features nearly 900 tables and can feed over 5,800 people simultaneously. This colossal eatery, terraced on a hilltop overlooking the city, covers an area of 3,300 square meters. Most diners find themselves needing directions to locate their reserved tables. Tourists flock to the location on a steep hillside to experience the restaurant at night, captivated by the colorful light fixtures that illuminate the entire hillside. This enormous venue boasts a seating capacity of 5,851 and was officially recognized as the world's largest hot pot restaurant by Guinness Records in 2022. And since then, it has been receiving tourists from all over China. The kitchen of Pipa Yuan prepares several tons of hot pot soup base daily, and the restaurant employs hundreds of staff members, including waiters, cooks, and cashiers. Chongqing is renowned for its spicy hot pot, with tens of thousands of restaurants specializing in this dish. What a delight. And that's how we end this show this week. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Joker Rogers.